Hello, everyone. I'm Blake Cullen, and I lead growth marketing here at SupportLogic. I have the pleasure of introducing our next session, Motivation Isn't the Problem, using simple models to pinpoint team problems with Chad Bates. Support managers and executives often chalk up poor performance to a lack of motivation in their struggling employees, but research shows that this is rarely the case. Chad is going to walk us through how to find simple models to pinpoint the problems that your team encounters and tools to find the right method to close the performance gap. Chad is a seasoned professional in customer support leadership and change management. With a proven track record, he has excelled in hiring, training, and coaching successful teams and employees while implementing effective case management and knowledge management systems. He prioritizes creating a supportive work environment where employees can thrive and grow their careers. We certainly appreciate that. As the director of support at Aduro, Chad brings his expertise in driving customer success and fostering a positive workplace culture. His leadership style emphasizes teamwork, continuous improvement, and delivering exceptional support experiences. With a focus on customer satisfaction and employee growth, Chad is dedicated to ensuring that Aduro's support team delivers the highest level of service and helps customers achieve their goals. Chad, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Blake. So just a bit of an agenda setting here today. We're going to talk about a term a lot of people may have heard in passing, and then get into what human performance improvement in technology means. And we'll talk about some of the tools and models that are part of that world. This is something that is, widely seen in the academic world, but trying to move this into support, and especially software support. And we'll talk about some of the things that are out there. We'll look at some models of how to find and how to address issues that people run into in the support world, and then we'll go to questions. So human performance improvement, or human performance technology, is a systematic and systemic look at where problems exist inside of organizations, large and small. So the difference between systematic and systemic is really how are we looking at them? We want to look for problems and look at systems and look at people and organizations systemically. We want to look at it from the top down, bottom up, inside out, to see how all of those things relate to each other. And we want to do it systemically. We want to have a process that has, a step 1, a step 2, a step 3, to make sure that it's repeatable. It's something that any organization can utilize, and uses a broad set of tools that allow for looking at different kinds of performance gaps. So what we're really looking for is how to find where the gap is in our performance, and then ways to fix that gap. So we'll talk more about what performance gap actually entails soon, but basically it's anywhere that we're missing the mark that we want to be able to hit. Inside of HPI, we use evidence-based tools, models, and methods. So we want to find the things that have, been researched, that have been proven, that work together, that we can actually line up in methodology to make sure that we have tested, how we're gathering the data, what data we're looking at. We're using models that have, a successful track record that we can look at. Different companies, different organizations, different parts of the world, and see that the tools and the models and the methods work over and over again. And one of the most important things here, it was when we get too focused on tools, models, and methods, is we want to make sure that we're still human focused. That at the end of the day, the people that are our employees, the people who are our customers, are the ones who are being affected by these changes. So We always want to come back to thinking about how is this going to change the environment that my people are working in. How is it that they're going to do their job? Is it going to make that environment better? Is it going to make their job better? Is it going to make them more successful? Because that's how we really get better performance and find better solutions all the way around. So the first question today is, what is the problem? And we're going to look at what we call the ADDIE model. ADDIE stands for analysis, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. And if you were to search this term out on the internet, there's lots of different graphics that make this, that show this model in different relations to each other. Some of them have everything stacked from top to bottom. So we do our analysis first, then we do our design, then we develop a solution, then we implement the solution, and then we evaluate how it went. I think one of the most important visualizations of what we're going to talk about today is this one that you'll see on the screen, which has evaluation at the center of all of these steps. I'm going to talk about mostly analysis and a little bit about design, develop, and implement, but they all come back to evaluation. And as we move through these steps, we want to make sure we're evaluating our analysis. When we take that analysis and we take that information into design, we're going to backtrack and take whatever we design, put it back into the analysis and evaluate, is this actually going to solve my problem? When we get to the develop step, we want to look at what we've actually built and go back to the design and say, does this match what we started out trying to design? Did we hit all the points we wanted to make? And then even go back to the analysis and say, is this actually going to fix what we found the problem is? A lot of times when we get into serial processes, it's easy to kind of lose the thread of, we found the problem was X, but through the design and the development process, we actually implemented something that was slightly off or didn't actually fix the situation that we had found the first time. So we want to make sure that analysis, we're always going back to the analysis, we're evaluating all these steps. We can also find other problems, other performance gaps in and of, when we're putting in, or we're going from step to step. So when we're going from design to develop, do we find that we've identified a performance gap that's not worth fixing, or it's so problematic and it's so expensive, it's too much, and we actually have to go back and redo our analysis or redesign the solution so we can find something that's actually going to be something that we can do. So we want to keep this model in mind as we're talking today, and as one of my favorite practices to do is when I find something this useful, I actually pin it to the wall of my office, so I have to walk by it every day and take a look at it. So hopefully you find some of the things we talk about today useful enough that you stick those to the office wall and come back and take a look at those, just to make sure you're on track as we're going through some of these processes. So finding the problem before you try to fix it is something that sounds super common sense, but I think all of us have run into a solution mode before we actually go through the analysis and ask ourselves some questions. So one of those is, what is the performance gap that I'm trying to fix? So we define the performance gap as a desired performance, where we want to be with sales, where we want to be with our customer satisfaction numbers, where we want to be with the number of tickets that we're handling a day. And then we're going to subtract that from our current performance, which is, what we're doing right now. And that's going to give us our gap. So if we're looking at, number of tickets or number of calls we're answering in a given day, and we need to answer 1,000, and our current performance is 800, our performance gap is 200 phone calls. So that hopefully makes sense. The next is to take that performance gap and compare it to what is possible. And this is where we call it performance improvement potential. So what this looks like is taking the highest performer you have, and if you only had that highest performer in all the seats in your call center or in all of the roles in your team, would you actually be able to make up for that performance gap? So again, if we have 10 people in our call center, and we need to make up 200 phone calls, and my top performer is only answering 2 more phone calls than the rest of the team, I'm not going to make up that. I'm not going to make up that gap. So this makes it so that I need to go back and reevaluate what my desired performance is. And often we go back and forth between step one and step two here to try to figure out, what is possible. Sometimes desired performance is something that's given to us by, our executive team or by shareholders or someone else in the process, but we need to make sure it's realistic before we go forward with this process. And then the next most important question is, should I even focus on this gap? And this is where we get into looking at potential ROI. And I'll leave this to the economists and the accountants, but there's some basic things that we can do here to look at. Is answering 200 more phone calls something that's required for the business? Is increasing our customer satisfaction score by 2% going to make a substantive difference if I have to spend $50,000 on this process to add in new technology, new software, and hopefully we get to a place where we see that we're spending a small amount of money. We're doing things that are, inexpensive, free, or within a good potential ROI to make a huge improvement in the process and wipe out our performance gap. So when we ask ourselves all these questions, we're ready to get into the actual analysis and hopefully find where our gap lies. So the tool that I'm going to talk about in a couple of versions here, this is the original behavioral engineering model. And the behavioral engineering model is extremely simple in its form. And the template for this is basically 6 boxes. We have two sections. One's the environment, one is the behavior, often called the worker. And then we get into information section, instrumentation section, and then the motivation. So when we break this down into the 6 boxes, we're going to ask ourselves some questions and we're going to think about a problem. And this is called Gilbert's behavioral engineering model. Gilbert is a researcher and a author that put this box together about 40 years ago. And this has been the basis for a lot of the work that's been done around process improvement and working to find human performance change. So when we look at these questions, we can vary them by appropriateness to the type of issue we're looking at, the problem that we find. And one of the most important parts here is to really break down the problem that we're experiencing or the situation that we're in to something that's very finite. We want to make sure that we're looking for a solution to a single problem, not a system of problems. Now, often that's what happens is we'll find that we have a number of issues that all line up next to each other. But when we start to do, when we want to work with the behavioral engineering model or any of the other models, we often want to separate them out and put them next to each other. And that may mean creating multiple models for each of those problems that we find, or trying to decide where the problems lie on a continuum. Are they one right after the other? Is one causing another? But we want to start that out by putting the information into what we'll call it the BEM. That's what we usually refer to it as, just for clarity and simplicity. So when we're looking at the BEM, we're going to start putting in information here about the information in the environment. So what data exists, what data is available, what are the things that the environment is giving us about this problem. So the case that we're going to use here is going to be around support ticket attachment to a knowledge base article. So for all of you who are KCS fans like I am, this is something that I've gone through with a number of organizations that I've worked at. Is, this seems like a logical process. We're going to attach knowledge base cases to or knowledge base articles to our cases to help our clients solve their own problems, help them understand what we're trying to get at. And sometimes we get really low attachment rates. We want to know why that is. So we're going to go through and ask these questions. what is the data that from the environment that the organization is seeing? What are the things that we're actually producing that will let everybody in the organization, from management to employees, see how we're doing and what we're doing? Then we're going to look at instrumentation. What are the things, what are the tools, the materials, the resources that are available for the organization to use? And this can be, what systems are you using? Are those systems working correctly? Do we have them tuned for the things that we're trying to solve? If we're encouraging our support agents to attach knowledge base articles, do we make that easy? Is that something that is, clear, simple, or is it super time consuming and something that's problematic for most of our employees to do? So we want to put that information into the BEM here in this section. We'll also look at incentives. What are the things that we're doing financially or performance-wise to encourage people to do, or to encourage the organization to do what we're trying to accomplish with this, we're inside of this problem. Next, we're going to go down to the behavior or the worker section. So we're going to focus on the individual employee. And when I say individual employee, I don't mean like, we're going to put Peter's name here. This is going to be as a typical worker. So what is the knowledge that we're giving them? What training are we providing? What are the things that they understand about their job that helps them understand what they're supposed to do? Again, we're going to look at capacity for the individual. Do they have the aptitude? Do they have the intelligence? Do they have the skills to do this job? Are we asking them to do something that they don't understand how to do or just lack the capabilities to do? I know a lot of customer service teams ran into the problem during the pandemic of, customer service became mini therapy. And are we asking too much of our employees that work on a call center to also be therapists to our clients and our customers? So those capacities, we want to make sure we're calling those out. And then we're going to look at motives. Does the individual motivation match what the employee understands, what they want, and what's going to actually drive their actions for this? So in some cases where we're doing something like attaching knowledge base articles, are we rewarding them for it? Are we giving them some kind of positive feedback to it? Are they seeing a reduction in time per case? What are the things that are, what's actually motivating them? And do they understand what's happening behind the scenes, like why we want them to do this? So this can be, motives, but it's not necessarily motivation. That it's something that they're bringing to the party themselves. This is a combination of what the organization's providing, what they're understanding, what they know, and also what drives them individually. So this model is what we're going to look at as our first tool. So this is the case study model here for this my spreadsheet of going through and looking at this first example. So inside of our environment data under the information section, we had a lack of feedback from managers on customer satisfaction and knowledge base article attachment. And we had a lack of alerts for aging cases. So we really didn't have any feedback to the organization about what was happening with attaching knowledge base articles. If we're missing a big section of cases that were happening during the day, we wouldn't see that until we ran reports at the end of the week or at the end of the month. And we also didn't have a lot of alerts for cases that were getting old and needed to be attended to by someone else. And this was an environment-wide situation. So this was something that the whole organization dealt with, no matter globally where our folks sat or even in what teams they were part of. That we had people inside of sales, people inside of customer success and support that were all out of awareness of what was actually happening. So when we look at the instrumentation, we would see that new cases are pushed to engineers when they're created. That would lead to cases being concentrated on the Eastern US because that's where our customer base was. And we had an imbalance with who was working what. And there was a sense of overwork on the East Coast and a sense of underwork on the West Coast. So this was just how the instrumentation actually worked. So our case management system didn't balance things out for us. We had to go in and find a way to do that ourselves. But we identified this as a problem as we were going through this case study. And then we looked at what incentives were in place for our organization. So we had an increase in incoming cases, but we had no incentive to close cases quickly or with knowledge base articles. We weren't tracking time to resolution, and we weren't tracking where these cases were getting handled. And we weren't doing a very good job of attaching what knowledge base articles were being used to close these cases. We were just seeing the backlog growing and growing. So when we looked at the actual worker and what they were understanding, they didn't have an understanding of how we had done reorganizations in the team to really focus on how this work was supposed to be getting done, where their teams existed, or where their backup was coming from. So when we go to capacity, they were able to attach articles in the system, but it wasn't something that was becoming very easy for them to do because they were just being inundated with the number of cases. So there wasn't any tooling built in that would suggest or help them with that. It was basically them doing manual searches over and over again and trying to do that attachment on their own. And when we get to motivations, we really, in interviews with engineers, they were really showing that they were just overwhelmed with the caseload, that they didn't have the space to go out and look for help. They were just trying to, keep their backlog down. And most importantly, they weren't aware of the organizational KPIs. We were talking about them inside of the management team and with the executive team, but we weren't discussing them with the individual employees so that they knew why we put those KPIs on the dashboard, what they were, what their personal and their team involvement with those KPIs were. It was just something they never saw. All they saw was that inbox getting fuller and fuller. So when we look at these motivations, when we look at this case study, we started to find lots of areas for improvement, and this is where we wanted to take what we found in this document and start pulling them apart. And again, this is where we start to find like lots of serial problems. We had some issues during a reorganization, what was causing focus issues. We had some tooling issues. We had some case distribution issues. And we may want to pull all those apart and go in and do a separate BEM for each one of those to really get clarity on, where is this problem coming from? What's causing it? Is my, East Coast versus West Coast team alignment something that I need to improve on? Is that causing capacity issues, or we're not seeing an incentive to actually spread these cases out? So again, we can spread these out and make multiple issues and basically expand our analysis a little bit as we get into the next steps. So there are additional models that are available out there that allow for expansion on Gilbert's model. So if you go out and want to learn more about this, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I always like to talk about models, and I've got a lot of this stuff saved up. But Gilbert's model equated to a couple of other models by Chevalier, who basically kept the same model but had different questions and different titles for some of these sections. And then we get into the SAM, which is another model that expanded out the environment, as you can see here. So where we had just the environment before, we actually spread that out to external, organizational, and job. So this gives us even more space to really pull apart what the problem is and try to find where we can make those corrections. And is that, is the problem coming from an external source? Is it something inside of my organization? Or is it literally the job description that the that the worker is getting from the company that we need to look at. So we can go through and tweak through all of these things and decide which model is going to work best. And as kind of a use case here, where I'm going with at Aduro is really taking that BEM model and handing that out to my managers and to members of the senior leadership team and asking for their input here. And then once we bring that in with the BEM, a lot of times that's, take that, put that in the SAM and kind of spread it out a little bit so we can get a better idea of, what is the environment that these problems are showing up in and what are the things we can do to work on those. But having all of that information in a different model, sometimes it's easier to gather in one place and work on it in another. But all these models are out there and available to folks if you're looking to get into using this model. So now let's say we've gone through the BEM, we've decided what our actual problem is, that we have a situation that our tooling is too complicated and we need to make it easier for our support folks to attach a knowledge base article and hopefully find the right knowledge base article. So this is going to lead us into the design, develop, and implement stage. So when we're using these findings to create something, we're going to design that intervention. So as we pull out all the information and as we're going through these different processes, you may go back to that BEM multiple times and add in more findings. And like I said, pull them out, find where exactly they're happening or what's causing those issues to come up. But if we keep going back to that during the design step, then we can really make sure we're going to solve that problem. So as we're going through here, we want to keep going back to the BEM to evaluate whether we're actually correcting the problem and closing the performance gap. Again, when we start running too fast, we can get into a situation where we're putting a solution in place that we haven't actually decided if it's going to solve our problem. We get a little too in love with something and we think it's a great technology or it's a cool tool or it's a neat method, but we haven't actually decided, is it going to close that performance gap for us? And do we have a path for that? So a lot of times this is really just penciling out, if I design this and develop this and implement this, do I see it solving the performance gap? And then continuously coming back to that to make sure that I'm actually going to do that. One of the things that comes out of a lot of the models in human performance improvement is folks jump to training and they think, oh, I got it. People, it's not motivation, but people don't understand how the job works. And the biggest problem with training, and I say this after being a trainer for 15 years, training's expensive, it's awkward, and it's hard to expand across a large geography. So often there's a simpler solution. And again, we want to go back to these models and figure out, what is it at the heart of the problem that I need to fix? If it's a knowledge issue, if it's an understanding of a problem, we always want to try to make the software easier to understand. We always want to make that process easier to understand. Build in more tooltips, job aids, things like that that are literally at the fingertips of the worker who's trying to do the task. Making sure that people understand what we're making an intervention here for and why we're doing that is more important than the training. And sometimes that's an email, sometimes it's a document, sometimes it's something completely different. We want to make sure that we have that information available to the worker on a recurring basis and in as easy a format as possible. All right, so we'll open it up to questions here, and here comes Blake.
I'm back, Chad. I love that ADDIE model and those case studies as well. And you're right, people often do jump to training as the answer. So very interesting, very compelling presentation. I invite the audience, if they do have any questions, head over to that Q&A tab and we'll ask Chad. I do have a few questions that have come in. First one is, are there any specific metrics or data points that you recommend tracking to measure the effectiveness of the methods used to address the performance gaps?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. And specifics always going to be determined by what you're trying, what performance gap you're trying to fix. So if it's, if it's call volume, if it's case management or case handling, if it's customer satisfaction, um, all those bits of data need to be included. I would say the one thing that I've really learned over the years is to make sure you have your leading and your lagging indicators. That customer satisfaction may not get fixed overnight, but if you have a metric that is relative to what's your leading indicator there, that it's how fast we answer the phone, or how long it takes us to solve a case, or one touch resolution, depending on what your industry is. Those are the things you've got to address, and I would include those in the analysis. Putting in that information early on in the process lets you know that you're going to keep coming back to that and tracking it. And as you go through the steps, you may have to come back and readjust what that number looks like, because you find something to be more realistic, or you realize that time to resolution was much more important than you thought it was at the time. So being able to come back and modify those is super helpful.
Yeah, that's key. One more question is, in your opinion, what are some effective tools or approaches that support managers and executives can utilize to identify and address the performance gaps within those teams?
Yeah, two really good questions in there. Identify is a whole area of study. So usually we use a lot of just data from Salesforce, Zendesk, whatever our platform of choice is, and we look at that data like it's the only thing that we know. And I think I encourage managers to use some surveys depending on the size of your teams. Use small group sessions, like do some interviews, like ask people their opinions. Make it a safe place for them to be honest with you. Sometimes that really involves like getting maybe more senior employees to ask the questions than the managers, but getting that real feedback helps you identify where the problems are, and handing out that BEM model to folks and asking them to build in some questions, give them an understanding of what it is that you're looking for, and use that to kind of go through a discussion process of, okay, where do you see the flaws in the incentives that we're offering? Where do you see a problem with the tooling? And then be able to take that information and kind of put it into your overall model, and then actually addressing the performance gaps. Going back to those same groups and really getting buy-in on the changes that you're starting to design. Make some of this stuff a whole team initiative, making sure that they understand why you're doing the analysis, how you're trying to make a change, what problems you're trying to fix, that you're going to go through a design and a development stage, then you're going to implement it, and that you want that feedback loop to happen, because to be honest, when you work for a lot of big support organizations, things just happen to you as employees, and if you get asked for your opinion and they actually listen to you, man, the things you'll tell your boss or whoever is working on that change. So it's it can take some time, but it's definitely a process that does help with actually resolving the gap.
Yeah, the qualitative data is key. The feedback loop equally important, to be able to make that true change. Well, Chad, on behalf of SX Live and behalf of SupportLogic for hosting, we want to certainly thank you as well as our audience for attending today's session. and look forward to hosting you on future events. So thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Blake.
All right. Take care. Enjoy.